Van
Yes.
Morris is a licensed social, what are you, master's or PhD yet? I think you should be triple PhD because you're so good. Um,
I'm
anyway, this is Lorena Hagenbart with the Center for Exceptional Families, and my coworker Karen is the one with all the hands, as you can see. Um, I want to introduce you to Van Morris. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Van is going to talk to us about unlocking the mystery of the brain. And I'm going to let her tell you some more about herself so she can get on with it. And you just tell me when you want to advance.
okay. I will. Thank you very much, Serena, and thank you, everybody. Sorry about all the technical difficulties. Everybody can hear me, okay? Okay. So my name is Van Morris. I'm a licensed certified social worker. I am in Little Rock, Arkansas. Actually, I have been working with children and families. It's been almost 13 years now. And so I really enjoy working a lot with children that have and families where they have a lot of challenging behaviors. A lot of those kids that maybe have been in therapy for a while and they can't seem to quite improve, or things tend to get worse. That's kind of where my history is. I really also have spent a lot of years working with foster care population, especially therapeutic foster care, and in day treatment type settings for both children and adults. So this is kind of, and I know you can't see me, I'm kind of using quotes right now. It's not quite a part two, but sort of is a part two. I know I did a previous webinar on emotional dysregulation. You did not have to attend that one to attend this one, nor do you have to have all that information to follow this particular webinar that I'm going to do today. But I am going to stem a little bit from that previous webinar into here. What I'm going to focus on a lot today is how much the body and the brain are actually connected, and how important sensory stimulation is to our whole body development, and what that could mean for us working with children and families. So I spent a lot of time in the last webinar discussing how the brain develops. I'm going to touch on that again. So some slides might be somewhat familiar. I'm not going to go into as much depth this time around as I did before, but I really want to focus on the role stimulation plays in development. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about how stimulation impacts mental health, social emotional skills, education, fine and gross motor skills, all of that kind of stuff. And then lastly, I'm going to spend the bulk of the time giving some simple exercises or activities that you can do to help stimulate the brain and thus improve behavior. And I kind of focused on a little bit of everybody. I'm not sure who all we have here, but I'm going to give some ideas that parents can do, that teachers can also do in the classroom, that can be incorporated in the classroom setting, and then also for just mental health therapists that we can also incorporate when we're working with kids. So hopefully it's going to be a little bit for everybody to work on. Okay, we can go next. So I just want to start, you can go to the next slide. So I just want to start by reminding us and learning a little bit of reminders about how the brain develops, okay? So again, the brain has kind of a bottom-up organization, okay? So the brainstem, of course, is the first to develop, which happens in utero, and then you go all the way up to the more complex area, the cerebral cortex, which is in the front, right? And then it also goes from side to side, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And typically the brain starts to develop with the right hemisphere first. And then after about 3 to 4 years, it flips over to the left. And about 3 or 4 years later, back to the right, just kind of goes back and forth, right to left, building upon one another. Okay. And every layer builds upon the previous layer. So from back to front and side to side, just like a foundation or layers of a cake, everything is whatever was learned with the first layer is built upon and serves as the foundation for the next layers, and so forth and so forth, okay? This is what we call sequential development, because it goes in a sequence, and it's all guided by experience. Next. So the raw material of the brain is, of course, the brain cell. So this year, remember this from the last webinar if you attended, which is the neuron. And again, when we're born, we have like 100 billion brain cells, more than there are even stars in the galaxy, right? And so as the brain cells mature, they get larger, they get stronger, and they form these like little branches, the dendrites that you can see in the picture there. And those dendrites connect with other dendrites and they communicate, and they connect in what we call a synaptic connection. And the more synaptic connections that you have, that's the stronger that they get. That's what's going to form the pathways in our brains that's going to help for development and learning. And it actually starts about 40 days after conception. Okay. So the neurons are really, really sprouting extremely fast, of course, in our brains. And during this time, there's also something that helps these neurons relay information, helps them to grow. And those glia cells, which is kind of like the glue part, they're really, really healthy. So synaptic connections are the key that makes learning possible, okay? But they depend on two things in order to do that. One is fuel, which comes through oxygen and glucose. And then the other is stimulation. You've got to have stimulation. So the glia cells provide the neurons with the oxygen and glucose they need. The stimulation comes from our experiences. Some of it is internal, like dreams and that sort of stuff. They do get some stimulation inside, but the majority of the stimulation that our brain needs to develop comes from our experiences, the external sides, okay? So without that stimulation, if the synaptic connections, the more stimulation that they're going to get, the stronger they're going to get. And if without that stimulation, they will shrivel up and they will die. Okay, so stimulation is extremely important. And so the stimulation on which the brain depends is next, pretty much anything to do with our senses. Okay, anything that you can think of, right? So light, sound, odor, taste, anything at all. The more that the brain cell is stimulated, the more that it's going to grow, the more that it's going to have processing speed, strengthen those synaptic connections, and form new synapses. Okay, and it's based on three things: the frequency of whatever that stimulation is, the duration, how long is it lasting, of course, and then the intensity of that. So basically, the impulses that stimulate the cells most frequently for the longest period of time with the greatest degree of intensity is going to have the greatest effect on the growth of the cells and the overall speed of brain processing. Okay, so the experiences that we have are what's going to help in the development of the brain. And these experiences are those stimulation that help strengthen those kinetic connections. So brain development is basically based off of the formation of memories, right? So, and that's based off repeated experiences, that external stimulation. They strengthen the synaptic connections, the pathway becomes encoded, it eventually becomes memory. This is why children learn to put one foot in front of the other before they learn to walk. They learn words to express themselves. They learn that a smile is usually going to bring a smile in return. And at some point, they don't have to think about these processes because the brains manage these experiences with little effort because the memories that have been created allow for that smooth, efficient flow of information. And that creation of memories, which is part of how the brain develops, which comes again from the external stimulation that we have, is a part two of our adaptation to our environment. So our brains understand and perceive the world around us in which we are and fashion our interactions with that world in a way that promotes not just our survival, but also our growth. This is also where we learn interpersonal skills. It's coming from our experiences. It's coming from our memories. It's coming from the external stimulation that we have, right? So I mentioned last time, this is kind of our adaptation to our environment is an example of this. So people that grow up in very rural, very hot climates, right? Very close to the equator. If they were to move someplace north, Canada or Russia, anything to that effect, they're going to have a very difficult time adapting because they're not used to that cold weather. Whereas somebody that was born and raised in those colder areas might have a harder time adapting to the really hot climate because we're not used to that. Our brain has adapted to the environments within which we live, right? So our brain, I talked a lot about the last time, that our brain will adapt not only to the environment that we're in, but it's going to adapt to a negative environment just as readily and easily as it will adapt to a positive one. So a lot of negative experiences that we have are going to impact the way that our brain forms synaptic connections and therefore the way that we're going to interact with other people, okay? Very basic. I know that I can go on 3 hours on nothing but the brain. So this is a very small snapshot of that. But all of this stimulation, all of this external stuff helps to develop the brain and develop the body. And why is this important? Because it has everything to do with how we learn. And I'm not just talking about like academics, even though it does play a part with that, but we're looking at social skills, we're looking at emotional skills, we're looking at how we understand ourselves, how we understand the world, and how we interact with other people. It's all coming from this external stimulation and the experiences we have. So we're going to just break it down just a little bit. You can go to the next. So I'm going to skip over for a second. I'm going to connect it back. I want to look at the importance of play and development. We talked very briefly about the importance of stimulation and very briefly the role that stimulation can play in the way the brain develops, right? It's vital. You have to have it in order to survive. And if you haven't heard these words, which I'm sure you have, then for children, play is their work, right? That means that kids are constantly learning from play. In fact, kids have to play in order to learn. They need it. It's not unimportant. It's actually necessary. And why is that? Well, because in order to learn, you have to be able to keep your attention on the subject, right? And to keep your attention there, it helps if you're interested in it. It helps if you're curious about it, if it stimulates your curiosity, right? When this stimulation is present in children or adults or anything to that effect, this is when we can start learning. This is when we want to learn. That motivation comes out. That self-motivation is what we call it. We want to do things that are interesting to us, that make us feel satisfied or competent or proud of ourselves. And that pleasure to learn came from play and or work that was fun, right? Because we're not wanting to do things that aren't fun. We're wanting to do things that are pleasant to us, that are attracted to us, that make us feel good. And that comes from play. And it comes from when we were really young. But play does so much more than just those things, right? It is actually the primary job of childhood and the single most significant contributor to healthy development skills. I mean, we're talking about it encourages language, motor, cognitive development, and everything in between. Play is kind of like that catalyst for kids to practice just about any and every skill that they're going to need to grow into independent, fully functioning individuals. And their environments that they grow up in help to determine how kids play. Because remember, our environment is all about that external stimulation, which is going to help fire those synaptic connections, which is going to form those pathways, which is going to help the brain develop so that we know how to react and understand in the world around us. I want to show you this next picture, this next slide really quick, and I want you to look at this. So these are pictures of playgrounds from, you can go next, from the 1920s, okay? And just look at them. I mean, I'm sure that some of you guys have seen this. We clearly are not going to see these types of playgrounds probably at our schools or in the parks anymore. It's slightly different than how it used to be. So play in and of itself is much different today than how it used to be when I was a kid and when my parents were kids, right? Our culture has kind of changed the meaning of play. And what does that have to do with development? What does that have to do with the brain? What does that have to do with the behaviors that we see with kids? Actually, it has quite a lot to do with it. So looking at these pictures, I just want you to kind of notice some of the stuff that we see, right? We see, I know in the bottom one, you see the kids swinging, standing up, and those are actually really tall swings. I mean, they can get really high. And that little contraction on the right, it looks like you're riding up that ladder and then just hanging down and sliding down that wood beam on two hands. I mean, some of this we would consider very dangerous, right, with a lot of our kids, but we didn't back then. And there's a reason for that. All of this type of play, everything that these kids are doing in these pictures is providing stimulation and input into the body, which is helping develop the body for learning. And we're not just talking about academic learning. We're looking at those social and emotional skills that we also see that are in emotional regulation skills and self-regulation skills. All of that is coming from that external stimulation. So all of this type of play, I'm going to use some occupational and physical therapy words, but all of this type of play is hitting on the vestibular, proprioceptive, auditory, visual, and even tactile systems. And that all, remember what the external stimulation, it's all of those senses, right? It's all helping to teach the kids what they need to know about themselves and the world around them. Remember, I mentioned that the brain develops sequentially, right? So back to front, side to side. And everything that happens in the foundation years is built upon in later years. That remains true with play too. The way that kids play impacts how they develop, which impacts how they learn, which also impacts their behavior, right? So when you're standing up and you're swinging on that swing that you see that one kid doing, I mean, they're learning a lot about moving against gravity. They're learning a lot about force. They're learning a lot about that pressure, right? They're learning about where their body is in space. You're learning about, climbing and all of that kind of stuff. You're using your core. You're learning about equilibrium. You're learning about your vestibular system. You're learning about all these things, which are actually core necessary components in order to do basics for fine and gross motor skills, basics for academics, and even basics for behavior. Okay, but here's how our kids tend to learn today. You can go next. You can go next. There you go. This is how our kids are learning and playing. Oh, sorry, go back one more. Thank you, man. So this is how our kids are learning. Our kind of concept of play has shifted a little bit. It's changed over the past few generations. And I'm not knocking any of the tablets or phones or video games or anything to that effect. I have a 6-year-old son, and he does enjoy, playing some games and watching some videos. Sometimes it's been a lifesaver in certain situations, and I get that. However, what we need to recognize is that if this is what we're using with kids, generally speaking, and this is how they're playing, it's going to affect the way their brain develops. It's going to affect the way their body develops. And in that sense, we're going to see a lot of shifts in behaviors and attitudes and even in abilities in the school, in the home, in the community type settings. Because today's kids, when we're focused, and it's more dangerous, I get it. I remember when I was a kid, my parents used to send me and my sisters out and tell us not to come back in until it was dinner time. I would not do that with my 6-year-old today. The world is just slightly different. So I understand the concept of how some of our views have shifted. However, the issue is it's still affecting the development, and it's affecting the way our kids are growing up. Our kids are getting less stimulation of a lot of that external stimulation that we need. Their vestibular systems, their proprioceptive systems, even some of that visual systems and the tactile systems are not getting that stimulation that we used to get, things that are related to movement. So I have personally seen a huge increase in kids that have focus problems, that have concentration difficulties, that struggle with inattention, hyperactivity. They have problems with self-regulation. They have problems with emotional regulation, social skills. They can't wait their turn. There's no sense of personal space, right? They're always in everybody's bubble. Can't seem to understand that. They're too rough with others when they're playing. Maybe they get irritable and frustrated really easily. Does any of that sound familiar for any kids that we work with? Yeah, and the question I have is, what if we as just a cultural have helped perpetuate some of those behaviors unknowingly by shifting that concept of play, right? Because our concept of the play has changed. If you'll go next, today's kids, again, like I just mentioned, you can go ahead. They're getting less stimulation of the vestibular and those proprioceptive systems. So when we get, and it alters the meaning of that play, right? So Athena Odin, she's a pediatric physical therapist, I want to say out of Texas, and she's done she's got an awesome book on this subject, and she's done some great work for in the school systems. But this is a quote that she has that I absolutely love. Once you alter the meaning of early childhood, you alter brain development and thus behavior. You change the environment, you change the experience, which is exactly true. Because remember, our brain grows and develops off of the external stimulation, which is the experiences that we had, those sensory experiences that we have, right? Positive or negative, they're going to have an impact on the brain. So when we're taking away some of that sensory experiences, then we're going to alter the way the brain develops, which means we're going to see a shift in the behavior that our children have. The movement and the sensory stimulation is so important to overall healthy development, right? Not just mental health. One of the things I've started to notice in the past year or so is that it's when I I'm seeing more and more kids that I'm working with. I've got to combine more than just mental health skills. I've been trying to research and learn more about occupational and physical therapy because all of those are combining together. Again, that stimulation that we're constantly getting from the external experiences that we have, it affects not just mental health skills. It's affecting those occupational type skills, the fine and gross motor skills, the physical, the way kids handle their body, which means you're going to see a shift to and a difficulty in the academic setting. Everything is connected, right? So when we have kids that are getting a lot of that external input that they need through active play, research has shown that they're going to not only have better coordination, better body awareness, but their attention skills improve. Their ability to focus improves. Their self-regulation skills improve. So when these systems are activated, kids have better focus and attention. And that's kind of the basic understanding of what's known as dynamic systems theory. You can go to the next one, Lorena. That was developed by a developmental psychologist. Her name is Esther Thielen. And this is kind of what she says on that. I'll let y'all read that. But basically what this theory talks about, and I find it fascinating and I think it makes perfect sense, is that the body and the brain are one unit. It's completely connected. You can't separate the brain from the body or vice versa, right? The visual, motor, tactile, proprioceptive, auditory, vestibular, all the pieces are working together and they're connected and they all affect one another. Everything is tied together with that, right? So movement, again, is the key to learning and it's the key to self-regulation. So to me, like I said, combining and looking at everything from a holistic approach, I think is going to be the most beneficial as a therapist, not just mental health, but even a physical and occupational therapist. We have to recognize that sometimes the behaviors that we're seeing in kids, it's not necessarily because they're bad kids, and it might not even be that they have ADHD. It could just be developmentally, their bodies aren't ready to handle those types of skills yet, but it comes across to us in a different way, right? So again, we've kind of had our kids today have a different childhood than the childhood that we had a couple of generations ago, right? It's been very limited. There's little developmental experience, little developmental or external stimulation that they're getting compared to how it used to be. And so we're expecting sometimes a lot of these kids to do a lot of the stuff that they're not capable of doing. And again, Athena, the quote that I just gave a slide or two ago, she said a thing in one of her webinars that I was listening to that really struck me and that I really, really liked a lot. Basically, what she is saying is that kids we talk a lot about developing habits and we do a lot of those behavioral theories, the rewards and consequences, right? If you do like behavior charts, I know we've all probably done those. If you can do X, Y, Z, 3 times, then you're going to get this, and if you do this, then we're going to take this away. We all have seen those in schools. We've seen them at home. We've done them in therapist's office. We have that there. But the idea there is that there are some skills that really aren't habits. Habits and skills are two different things. Emotional regulation, social skills, emotional skills, even sitting still, focusing, paying attention, hyperactivity, remaining in control of your body. Those aren't habits. They're skills. They're learned. And how are they learned? They're actually learned through play and all of that external stimulation that some of our kids have been missing, right? So here's the idea that she said, that we are only capable of developing a habit of skills that we are actually capable of doing. For example, I am capable of walking every day, right? I'm capable of going out and doing some walking every day. That doesn't mean I'm going to do it, but I am capable of doing it. I'm capable of eating healthy. Doesn't mean I'm going to, but I'm capable of doing it. So therefore, I can develop that habit. But if you put a 5-year-old behind the wheel of a car, he is not going to develop good driving habits because he's not capable of doing that no matter how often we stick him there. It's the same as some of these other behaviors right there, the effects. It's the same as some of these kids that maybe are hyperactive, that don't have emotional control, that have some immature social behavior, that, the space invaders, they might not be capable of developing habits to help with those because they're not ready. Their bodies are not ready for that because developmentally, they haven't been getting the stimulation that they need in order to do those things. Does that make sense? In other words, a lot of these behaviors that we're seeing that are related to mental health that we work with on kids one-on-one, they might not be ready for because they haven't gotten the stimulation that they need. Their synaptic connections in their brain has not developed enough for them to be able to do. Those types of skills there, right? They're not hardwired in us. They're learned by learning how to use our body. And that's learned through our environment. It's learned through our experiences. It's learned through the stimulation and how we move within that environment. So basically, learning has little to do with habits and a lot more to do with the sensory experiences that we have as kids, okay? And that we go through. Does that make sense? Somewhat? Okay. I want to show you a little bit or tell you a little bit, because this is like the meat of the thing that I really like about how can we use this ideas? How can we take stimulation and how can we help to build up our children's brains and thus improve not just their focus and attention, but also improve their behavior, overall behavior, okay? So I'm gonna start first with ideas for parents that I want to look at. First of all, parents working with any kids, if you've got some kids that have some of the effects that were shown on the previous thing, I'm gonna tell you, intentionally take the time out of your day, and I know some of this is gonna be very simple. I understand that, but I'm gonna tell you, I've been using some of these techniques and I've seen a big, big difference in a lot of kids, especially kids where no other techniques have really worked with them, okay? But my first thing I'm gonna tell you is make the time for play with them. I would tell you to spend at least 20 minutes once a week doing nothing but play. And I understand that this is difficult. I'm a single parent. I have a 6-year-old. We commute an hour to an hour and a half every day for work and school. So some nights we don't get home till 7 and his bedtime is 7:30. And so it's really, really difficult to find time to just play. It's really easy for me to say, just go watch TV and go to bed, right? But I have found that when I take the time out and intentionally spend the time with him to play, I actually get a lot better responses from my son. He actually sleeps better at night. He's not waking up throughout the middle of the night. He's not as grumpy. He's more apt to follow my directions. He can stay focused longer. It's amazing what just 15 minutes, 20 minutes can do when we spend that time with our kids, right? I would tell you to have a play night. Bring back some of the play stuff, a lot of the fun game nights. I'm going to give you some suggestions of that. If you go to the next one really quick, Lorena. And when we're talking about play, guys, I'm literally play. Pull out some jump ropes, hula hooping. Think about when we were kids and the things that we did. A lot of it, though, is you need to take them out to the parks. Go outside, get exploring, because everything that you're doing, think of the senses. What can you do with play that would engage all of the senses, right? So when you're looking at playing board games, get those board games like headbands, right? Where you're really getting involved, or cranium, when you're really moving your bodies and doing that kind of stuff. Go outside, charades, trampoline is always really good. Of course, Play-Doh, finger painting, that kind of stuff. Imaginative play is really good. Encourage your kids to just play, make up the stories, pretend to be, my son loves us for us to pretend to be ninjas, or we're going through the house trying to find, he always says we're going through the house to find zombies, you know, that we can shoot, or things to that effect. You know, things to that, that's really going to be a lot of that external stimulation that some of our kids are missing when they're playing the tablets and the phones. So really encourage a lot of that sensory type play there. You can also, on the next one, these are some actual sensory type games that you can play with your kids that really help to build up that brain. And it's also going to help with regulation type skills as well. Okay, because that's huge. For me, any type of behavior that we're trying to change, no matter how significant it is, it's going to start with regulation. You can't change a lot of intense behavior until you can get them regulated, right? So these activities can help with that. I'm going to explain them, but all of these activities can actually help to break habits, improve gross motor skills, help with listening skills, social skills, teamwork, controlling emotions, and actually help to impulse control as well. So I know everybody knows red light, green light. You say red light, you freeze. You say green light, you just move around and be silly, right? And every time you say red light, you freeze. Great game. But then reverse it to where red light, you're moving around, and green light, you're freezing. And that's where a lot of that impulse control is going to come from, right? And where the kids have to be really intentional about paying attention to their bodies and what's going on with their bodies, but it's done in a playful way. And it's amazing when you shift that kind of talk, you're doing the opposite of what you expect. It's amazing how much is going on in the brain and those synaptic connections and with that stimulation. Dance freeze is the same thing. You play fast music, they dance fast. You play slow music, they dance really slow, but then reverse it. On the slow music, they dance fast. And on the fast music, they have to dance really slow. You can get creative with that. Pop the bubbles is a favorite of mine. I do that with so many kids. You blow the bubbles, especially kids that have a lot of ADHD type behavior or trouble with controlling emotions and behavior outbursts. So I blow as many bubbles as I can, and I just tell them to pop as many as they possibly can, as fast as they can before they hit the floor. Jump on them, stomp them, move their hands around, whatever they want to do. And then after they popped all the bubbles, we've done a couple of rounds, then I tell them they have to be perfectly still and they can't move, and I blow the bubbles on them and I have them fall over them, and they can't pop any bubbles, even if it lands on their nose or on their head or anything to that effect. And so then they just have to let the bubbles fall. And that really is difficult for kids to do, but it's amazing that kids that have so much trouble, how much they can really focus during these games. So you just are reversing what it is that we're naturally wanting to do. And that can go, again, it's play, but I'm telling you that stimulation, it goes so much to helping kids learn, because remember, we're dealing with kids' developmental levels, not their chronological age, right? And so kids that are older, 12 or 13, that are acting in some areas like they're 6 or 7, clearly their brain has not developed in the proper ways that we expected them to do. And that probably has a lot to do with the lack of certain stimulation due to the change in our viewpoints of what play means and what we allow them to do, right? So we need to go back through play and re-stimulate those synaptic connections with using all the senses, which is part of these games, right? Cooperative race, you can have you and your child, or you can have the siblings. I've used balloons, I've used tennis balls, I've used soccer balls. You can pretty much a stuffed animal, you can choose any object you can. And basically, you just have from one end of the room to the other, or you can have them go around an obstacle course, whatever you would like to do. But basically, they're standing there with whatever object you've chosen, and you might call out a body part. So it could be hands, and then they can only touch their object with their hands, and they have to walk from one point to the other point in the room, right? Or maybe you say elbows, or maybe you say hips. You can say head, back, chest, arms, whatever that is. And then they have to work cooperatively in order to get from point A to point B. And that does a lot, because you really have to work together. There's a lot of teamwork there into it. You have to understand your body. You have to understand where to put pressure. So you've got that gravity. I mean, you're hitting all of the senses when you're doing that cooperative race. And so that can be fun too. Anything to do with tapping, you can tap out on, like a beat, drumming and tapping a beat on the table, and they copy you. You can tap it on your legs and they copy you. Play that game of cups. You can get onto YouTube and it can teach you about how to play that game. That's a really good one too. Mirroring is a lot of fun. It would be like if I'm standing there and I'm just going to use Lorena, and she's in front of me, then she's my mirror, and everything that I'm doing, I know she can't see me, that's okay, but everything that I'm doing, she's copying me exactly as if she's my mirror, right? So if my right hand is going up, her left hand is going up, right? And I might do silly faces, and I might bend, and I might move around, but there's so much in attention and focus and following behaviors and all of that you can do from mirroring. So all of those things are sensory games that you can play with kids, right? And therapists, you can even pull these. I do these in sessions a lot. I will tie them into beginnings or end of session, especially if I'm doing trauma work. I'll do these games at the end of sessions, the last 20, 30 minutes. We just do sensory type games to help regulate and to help bring the body back, and so that's not as activated, but it really can help to build up those skills that we can't teach. Because again, some of those skills are not skills that you can teach. They have to be learned through experiences, which is why we want to type in some of these games. Research has shown that kids that play games like this right there twice a week for maybe 30 minutes have improved self-regulation and impulse control in just about 6 to 8 weeks. Very simple, but it makes a big, big difference. you can go to the next one. So mental health therapists. I'm going to touch on the school in a second. I spent a lot more time on the school side because it was fascinating to me, but I'll show you that in a second. So for mental health therapists, if you're working with kiddos, that do have a lot of behavior problems that can be very challenging. And again, we want to start with the regulation piece. That's the most important. One of the things that you want to do, and I always do this with all kids, is try to work on safety, regardless if they've had trauma or not, because we don't always know if they've had trauma or not. And what we might view as trauma, parents and families might not see that as trauma. So I don't always base off what the family says, right? Because you just never know. And sometimes what the kids view as trauma is not what we would view as trauma. I have an adult now that I'm working with. He's in his 20s, but he had a short period of time where he was bullied slightly and never told anything about it, but it affects him significantly today with his interpersonal skills. So you never know. So I always focus on safety at the beginning, and safety goes with a lot of those sensory type experiences, right? Because you think about it as a baby. How do babies feel safe? They feel safe when the mom and dad are holding them, right? They have that pressure, they have that gravity, they're wrapped up, they're warm, right? So you have the temperature, maybe they're cooing at them, they're singing softly to them, right? So you had that sound, you had the gentle caressing. Everything that helps young babies feel safe has to do with the senses. So that's where we're tying it in. Again, senses, stimulation, synaptic connections, brain growth, everything's connected. So I work a lot with that. Number one, I encourage that connection with the parent. So those games we talked about before, right? Spending quality time, spending the play, that kind of stuff. I really spend a lot of time focusing that. But then anything there that you can think of with senses, incorporate that into your situation. I mean, into what you're going to do. I have drinks in my office that I will offer kids. Hey, would you like some cold water? I've got Capri Suns. I always make sure it's okay with the parent, but I always have at least water. And I will offer that to the kids if they want it. I offer them a straw if they want it, right? I take into account lights. Sometimes I might turn the lights a little bit off and let it, so it's not the bright light that we have in here. I might play some soft music. Classical music is really great. There could be other musics that you can put on too. I have essential oils, smells like coffee, pine, peppermint, eucalyptus, lemon. Those are really, really good for invoking that sense of safety and stimulating the brain to really help with the regulation and emotional type side of the brain. Those are some really great scents that you can use. Have bean bags or rocking chairs actually are really great. I don't have a rocking chair in my office. I would love to have one, but bean bags, I do have some like soft furry type things, and blankets, weighted blankets are really good, especially that pressure or gravity. That can help a lot. Sand, you don't have to be a sand play therapist to use sand, but having something that's textural that they can play with would be really good. A mini trampoline. Movement and rhythm helps a lot to create the sense of safety. So anything that you can think about to incorporate movement and rhythm helps. Every movement we make stimulates the brain. And so that's one of the most important elements of brain development. So anything that you can do, sometimes I have them tear paper and throw paper balls, and we'll do it over and over again, right? Painting, coloring, modeling clay, Play-Doh, and doing the same thing over and over. I know it seems repetitive and it seems boring, but that's also how the brain develops, right? Repetitive, the more things, remember the duration, intensity, and the more often that the stimulation occurs, the stronger the synaptic connection, the more the brain grows. So when we're talking about helping to safety, same things. I do some stuff same over and over and over and over again. And it really, really helps to bring that child in, right? Then once you've done that, any activities, you can go next, any activities that you can think of to incorporate more play. And again, even when I'm working with trauma, I am going to focus and add in play into my activities always, and always going to bring the senses, because it all comes back to regulation, right? And everything that we're going to do with kids, we might end up activating them, and we might activate them without them knowing it and without us knowing it, which is why everything that I end, I'm going to end with some sort of sensory or play type activities. So, and it also helps to take conflict out of things too, whenever you're doing that. So I do focus on a lot of transitions. That seems to be where a lot of issues might happen with some kids, right? Because that has to do with control, right? And so this could be kids that might be running down the hallways if I'm at school, running down the hallway at the office, screaming, crawling all over the table. I have some that might hide in the chair, hide in the corner and form barricades. That's happened many times before whenever there was some stuff. So before, if I know there's going to be a transition or we have to do something, I might change it up. Your question might be, how can I help this kiddo if he was half his age, right? So I might turn it into a game or into some sort of activity, right, that we can do. So, you know, if it's time to leave and some kids don't want to leave, then it might be something of, oh goodness, you know, let's see if you and your mom, I might just immediately do a 3-legged race and see how quickly the kiddo and the parent can get from my office to the front door, right? Or you can do a I spy, or I wonder if you can find me, go hide in doorways and see if the kid can come out and find you, right? You can do I spy when you're walking out and walking around the office or walking around the school and playing I spy and helping the kids. It's like a distraction type technique, right? You can do change the pace. I have kids follow my feet a lot of the time, especially young kids that have trouble with attention, with ADHD type stuff or anything to that effect. I will stand there and I might do small steps. I might do giant steps. I might do dinosaur steps. I might do jumps. I might do spins. And their job is to follow my feet from one spot to the next, from the front door to the office, right? Or from the office back to the front door, that kind of a thing. And it does so much because not only are the kids doing what you ask them to do, right? They're having fun. They have to focus. They have to pay attention. So, and they're getting stimulated because when every time we're jumping, what are we doing? You know, that noise, we have pressure, we're hitting our feet on the ground. That's sense, that's a sense, that's a stimulation, that's hitting that synaptic connection. So putting your arms out, acting like an airplane, you know, going from one place to another, that's stimulation, that's senses. That's going to stimulate the synaptic connection. That's going to help the brain grow. That's going to help develop the skills that they need, right? So anything that I can do that's going to help them to focus on something else as we're going through transition times, right? Practice when it doesn't matter. If a kid struggles with transition, I practice in that playful way. All of those games I gave you, red light, green light, Simon Says, you know, start and stop games, that helps a lot when it comes to control and transition stuff. And it also helps children to develop the ability to make the shifts from point A to point B, or from one activity to the other activity, right? Hello, goodbye games. If I have a lot of kids that are working with, you know, have trouble going to schools or have trouble going to one home or the other home, right? I might have them do some hello, goodbye games as well. I'm checking time. I know we were late with it, but I want to get into some of the kids. So you go to the next one? I'm sorry, Lorena.
I'm trying, but something happened to my,
Oh,
just keep talking. I
okay. I'll just keep
can't
talking.
see what happened.
That's fine. So one of the things, looking at classroom activities, and this can also be good for therapists if you're working with schools, right? But try minimizing it at the top, that might help some. But classroom activities that can help to promote learning and to help some of the developmental stuff. Fidget tools are, oh, I forgot about that part. I forgot about these games. So that's a good thing that you put that on there. Hand clapping games are really, really great for, I do use that a lot with individuals with kids in my room. That's so good for regulation, and it's so good for sensory type stuff. With that, anything to do with balloons, having kids hit the balloons up in the air, one arm after the other, and trying to keep their feet still, or seeing how long they can keep it into an air. Grid jumping, I created on the floor of my office. I just used construction paper, streamers, and I think packing tape, and created, it almost looks like hopscotch, but not quite. It's just big squares with numbers and colors in it. And basically I will have a lot of the kids that come in and they'll choose a color, and then I'll yell out colors that they have to jump to. But I had them jump certain ways, like they had to land with their feet facing a certain way or something to that effect, right? Or I might call out a number and they have to jump to the number. And then I'll either mix it up, either a color or a number, and they have to go from that. So that really, really helps a lot with that vestibular and proprioceptive, hitting those systems and helping with that. Anything to do with yoga and mindfulness is really, really great as well. If you do groups, parachute play, one of my favorites. You can get a parachute off of Amazon, 25 bucks. So great for stimulation, so great for sensory type stuff. It's awesome for teamwork, for cooperation, for coordination. You can do 1,001 different things with the parachute. Get a tennis ball, use that as well. So you can do a lot of good stuff with that online. It's got tons of examples. Whole body songs, some of those come from TheraPlay, which I love, but you can look at whole body songs on YouTube. Tootie Tie just did this. I go to the day treatment school for our kids. Parachute Play I use a lot, and those whole body songs, Tootie Tie, Go Bananas. Think of all those games and songs you might have done at camp. You know, those are great ones to incorporate into group play, and I do them all the time, and the kids love them. And I get a lot more cooperation out of my groups when I'm incorporating the sensory and stimulation type play into that. Okay, so for teachers, some things that you can do, and some of these might be a little bit different to do. You might not be able to do some of them in the classroom, but I'm going to give them to you anyway. Homeschools, you can also do this as well for any of you that homeschool, but fidget tools are really, really great if you can offer some fidget tools for some kids. Look, I'm 42 years old. I have an extremely difficult, hard time sitting down for an hour listening to somebody talk. I just do. I can't do it. So I have to do something, and I'm 42. So having 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12-year-olds sit and do that all day long, they're not going to be able to do it. Some of them might not be capable of doing it because it's not a habit. Remember, it's a skill that's learned. And if they have not developed the skills that they need to learn that through that sensory input, they're not going to be able to do it no matter how much we try to make them do it, right? So fidget tools can be a good way to help them do that, right? Balloons filled with flour, socks with dry rice, pipe cleaners can help, flexible straws. You can even put Velcro and stick it under a table or desk that kids can just play with the Velcro underneath, rub their fingers on it. Things to that effect, small hair bands, sorry. You can also, on the next one, do sensory to teach an activity. So this is an awesome book that I got that I've been using some of it when I work with some schools and do 504 IEP plans. This is developed by some occupational therapists. It's awesome. You can order it online, but it has got a host of different ways that you can incorporate movement and sensory into the classroom and into the learning. And I'm going to give you some examples for the book. If you go to the next one, just some things that they did. So some of the things that they were looking at were, if you go next, it'll show it. So like spelling, if you're looking at doing some spelling, some like grid jumping, like I said, where you can put the letters on the floor and you name out the word cat or whatever, and the kids have to jump to the letters to spell, right? Instead of verbally saying it, have them jump to it because that can help, right, with it. You can do the secret code. So maybe you put them into teams is what they say, and they can create a movement by assigning a certain movement for each letter of the alphabet, right? Or it can be hand movements if you don't want a lot of the body movements. And then you write the spelling words on a card and a kid can pick a card and then they use that secret code, almost like charades, and act out those letters and the other kids have to spell it out. That can be a great way. We've seen the I Spy shape bottles. You've seen those before, you know, but you can also make those for math and just put certain shapes in it, or you can put numbers in there and put, 5 + 6 equals, and they have to find the number. Using their bodies as angles. So if you're learning about right angles, left angles, not left angles, sorry, I'm not a math person, but when you're doing angles, they can try to make them with their bodies, on the floor or anything to that effect. I'm sitting here trying to do it and I realize that y'all can't see me with my arm motion, so sorry. But the right angles, acute, obtuse, and straight, they can make that with their bodies, right? Cloud formations, when you're looking at science, using hair conditioner and cornstarch, you can create dough. Each kid gets some with pictures of a cloud and they can use the dough to recreate the cloud formations. And then you can actually make a cloud formation and the partner has to guess what it is. So again, you can pretty much incorporate sensory work into almost anything in the classroom. Geography, I love this. You can get bins and one with sand and maybe the other two are smaller and they're labeled land and water, and you put a whole bunch of those little animals in the big sand where you would get at the dollar store, and kids have to dig around and then separate them out into land and water, right? Or you can, if they're learning direction, you can introduce those concepts of north, south, east, west, mark somewhere in the room, right? Here's north, here's south, here's east, here's west. Placed arrows in a line on the floor facing in different directions. Have a kid stand behind the first arrow, state the direction they're facing, and then have them jump or walk from arrow to arrow one at a time, calling out the directions. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. That book has some awesome examples of ways that you can do sensory bins and things to that effect. You can put a map at the bottom of a sensory bin, fill it up with some dried beans or rice, and then the kids can dig around to try to find, places on the map, places in geography, and and all of that kind of stuff. So anything that's going to help senses, you got to bring the senses into the work. It's going to help increase their ability to do what we as teachers would want them to do, right? Other ideas for the classroom. This is, again, it's from Athena Odin. She's actually the creator of Ready Bodies, Learning Minds, which is an amazing program actually for schools, where it really works about using motor labs to increase the child's ability to focus and pay attention and learn and decrease negative behaviors. But these are ideas that they have come with, and it's basically with, in the classroom, if you've got kids and they need to write, allow them to stand up. Put some bean bags around the floor. I mean, because if your object, if your main thing as a teacher is to get them to do the work, then it doesn't matter if they're doing it standing up or sitting on the floor, as long as they're being respectful about it, as long as they're being quiet about it. I mean, we need to have some boundaries, I get that, but allow them to do it in other ways, right? Because kids learn differently. Maybe allow some people to put some stuff under their feet to do it. Oral stimulation, honestly, sometimes gum or having some small piece of candy that they can chew on helps a lot with kids in the learning environment. Every now and then change the locations of the desk, have them move it around, right? That pushing and pulling is really good for the proprioceptive system, which is going to be really, really helpful for some kids that have some hyperactivity type issues, right? Around with that. Allow a lot of the movement to them. Allow them to go and stand in the corner or sit on a windowsill while you're doing a lecture, if that's going to help them to pay attention and that kind of a thing. If you look at the next slide, sorry, Lorena, these are ideas from an actual teacher out of Texas here, and they teach 8th grade science. And these are some of the stuff that he does in the classroom. And basically he says that he has seen a lot of increase in attention and focus and positive behaviors with it, right? So it's every now and then when they start to get a little bit restless, he has everybody stand up and they've got a minute where they can stretch, they can kick their feet, they can do anything that they need to kind of just reset, in other words, right? Have them stand up and walk around the room every now and then come back to and stay seated with anything to that effect. Bring in music, sing songs together. Popcorn is basically when you like sit down and then you jump up, when somebody says popcorn, and then you can reverse it where you're standing up and you say popcorn and you jump down and sit. So you can do random games like that. If you're doing vocabulary, do it in charades, right? When you're doing grammar rules, can you come up with hand motions for it? Can you make up songs for it? Allow them to stand up anytime, as long as they're being respectful and they're not being disruptive and they're not making noises, right? So it's just different things to that effect. If you can bring in sensory type stuff into everything that we're doing, what we're doing, the goal is to build up those synaptic connections in the brain, right? Kids were meant to move, and studies show that free play and that movement correlates with better executive functioning in kids, which is going to help with decision-making skills. It's going to help with regulation skills. It's going to help with problem-solving skills. And that unstructured play, just allowing kids to play and be themselves, not telling them, no, you can't play that way, or you can't play this way, or you have to play with this one center, right? But unstructured play is essential for physical, social, and just overall emotional well-being. And studies have shown that people who have plenty of free time during childhood, that remember having that free time during childhood, actually enjoyed a lot high levels of social success as adults. So it's really, really, my point in a lot of this is just to let you guys know that the brain needs stimulation to grow, and that stimulation is not just exclusive to mental health issues, but that it actually can impact a host of variety issues with kids, right? It can impair their ability to stay focused in class. It can prepare their academic success. But the more demands that we put on the kids, and the more that we try to increase their, quote, study habits or work habits or, friends habits, we're not really helping as much as we think, because developmentally they're not ready, because those synaptic connections have not been made. The synaptic connections haven't been made because they haven't gotten the stimulation that they needed, because the idea of play has changed, right? And that it all goes back to the beginning. So that stimulation is key. So my thing too, you guys, would be, how can you incorporate sensory stimulation and movement into the work that you do with the kids, whatever platform that might be. I know that I rushed through that, and I'm so sorry, but I know we had an hour, and I know that we kind of got to a late start with some of the technical stuff. So I apologize if it was rushed. If you do have any questions, I'm fine to stay on to answer any questions. I've also put my email on there that you can email me. So if you want a little bit stuff that's in further depth, I can give that to you. Lorena also has a copy of this PowerPoint, so she can send that out to anybody that might want that as well.
Okay. I think there's one. Patricia said it was really good. Thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. Van, this has been wonderful. I'm one of those kids that got to play on the real playground.
Yeah.
I have to say, when they were swinging, standing up swinging, I can relate. Oh boy, could I
that's
relate.
awesome.
Let me see if I can stop screen sharing here. Okay, and I don't see any questions. Does anyone have any questions that Van could answer? I want to thank everybody for participating. This will be on our website in about a couple of days, and also on our Facebook page. Also, I'll be sending out a survey in 30 days. And for those who return the survey, you will be entered into receiving a drawing for a gift card. The only person I can't help send a gift card to is Ivana in Croatia. So anyway, I truly appreciate Ivana staying on. It's after 10 in over there in Croatia. But I truly do appreciate you all. And if there's no questions, I guess we can say goodbye. So, Karen, do you have anything?
No, ma'am. I just said thanks and very good info.
Yes. There's so much in there, because I can think of things that we do as grandparents or as parents with all of this vestibular activity. My son, Isaiah, has he's quadriplegic. And so all along we do things and always have been working on vestibular activities and anything to help his senses, cold, hot, gooey, hard, you know, all kinds of sensory things. And he just loves it. Music is his favorite. He loves to dance. But
Awesome.
anyway, thank you so much, Van, for your time, your talent. And I can just listen all the time. And Ivana said, good night. Goodbye. Good night. Get some sleep, girl. All right. Well, Karen, can you stop the video? Because I can't do it on this side for some reason, our videotaping. So anyway, well, everybody, the recording.
I've stopped the recording.
Thank you. So everybody, thank you so much. Dee from Texas is here, and Charlotte, a dear friend of mine, and Maria, and all the others that hang out. I appreciate y'all so much. Thanks again, Van, and we'll be connecting another time.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, hon. Have a good night. All right, bye-bye.
Miss Lorena, Miss Lorena.
Yes.
Ooh. It's that there's a recording button still flashing. I don't know where it's coming from. I stopped my recording, but there's still a red button up here that's flashing.
Okay, let me see.
Do you see that?
Okay, how's that?